I started out at Air Studios in 1973. Air Studios was owned by George Martin, and I was fortunate enough to be assisting Jeff Emmerich, who engineered a lot of the Beatles albums, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, and a lot of other music as well. And I was his assistant for 18 months, and he was kind of my mentor in a way. And I also worked with other people, George Martin, Bill Price, Robin Cable, and other engineers that I learned a lot from.
I used to be, in the 80s mainly, I used to be a freelance studio drummer in London. I just decided that's what I wanted to do with my career rather than playing in a one-set band or anything like that. I did a few bands as well, but I used to do a lot of studio work around London, and I did, well, the bands that I worked with a lot, I did the Waterboys for a year or two, and then I did Julian Cope for 3 or 4 years on and off, as well as doing other albums. And then I left Julian Cope and joined Paul McCartney's ensemble and did that for 3 years, which is where I met Peter Henderson.
I met Chris in 1987, I think it was, and it was a recording with Paul McCartney at what later became Paul McCartney's Russian album. Chris was there for a couple of days, and that was the first time I met him, and then I met him on subsequent sessions with Paul McCartney, and also I ended up doing a film called Get Back, which obviously was a live film of the Paul McCartney's band that Chris was in. And we sort of became friends, and later on we started doing projects together. And a little bit later than that, we started building up a library of drum loops.
After the McCartney tour, well, I did an album and then did a tour, and that was like a 3-year package of work. And then I did Dire Straits, a tour, another big tour, which was like 1.5 years just solid on tour. And at the end of that, I just felt burnt out from touring, really. And a friend of mine was doing film and television music in London. He said, "Oh, I think you'd be great at doing that. Why don't you do music for television and stuff like that?" So I just completely sort of packed in drumming and set up a home studio. And to cut a long story short, the real sort of big music in film and television at that time was the sort of the drum loops and the Craig Armstrong Massive Attack and DJ Shadow type stuff. So all the projects that I was doing TV wise, they kept saying, "Oh, can you do something a bit like Craig Armstrong, or can you do something a bit like Massive Attack?" And even though I was a drummer, I didn't have a big enough studio to do drums or anything like that. So a lot of us guys were just using like drum samples and drum loops at the time. And I could never quite find the right ones for what I wanted to do, and never quite find the right sounds. So I knew Peter at the time through the McCartney album, and I said to him, "Oh, do you want to do some drum recording and just get a little library of our own together?" So we over the course of about a year, we went out to studios and did a bit of recording, and then went back to my place and mixed it and made our own drum loops and our own drum samples. And that's how we sort of got into doing this sort of thing that became Custom and Vintage. And all those guys like Massive Attack and DJ Shadow and everything, they were mostly using these old style drum sounds because they just seemed to have a lot more character, and they were just different to the bombastic rock sounds that were around in the 80s, like the Power Station, the Duran Duran and all that kind of stuff, and Bruce Springsteen. So it was a very sort of small sound. It was like the James Brown, Parliament Funkadelic sound, very dry sound. And then when drum samples started to come out, they were also, I think they were catering to the big rock sound as well. And so that wasn't, we didn't want to have that sound. So we started recording in these much smaller rooms with more vintage drums and more vintage equipment to get the Massive Attack type sound. And so that's how we ended up choosing these drums and choosing the studio 2 kilohertz and stuff like that, is just to have a completely different sound to this big rock sound that was around at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And it was really just a means to an end. We just needed these sounds for the work that we wanted to do in film and television and songwriting.
Around about that time, the first Superior came out, and we became aware of it and were impressed with it. And so we gave Andreas at Toontrack a call and asked if we could maybe do a library for it. And he asked us to send him some stuff. So we sent a whole load of different sound recordings from different studios, and the sounds he was particularly liked were the deader sounds from 2 kilohertz studios. And the reason he liked that was he thought it would complement Superior 1, which was a liver sounding, slightly bigger room. And so he basically asked us to do a recording of 2 kilohertz in it.
Yeah, I remember when Chris and Peter contacted us, it was amazing because these 2 guys, I mean, they've done a lot of favorite records of ours, such as Supertramp and Paul McCartney and stuff like that. Amazing records, amazing sound and everything. And when they sent the sound to us of the 2 kilohertz studios in London, we were amazed by the dry sound and the quality of the sounds. So that's when we decided immediately to go with that and do something with it. And I'm very happy we did, because those recordings will never be done again, because that, first of all, that desk doesn't even exist in the studio anymore. It's not there, so you cannot go there anymore.
It was recorded through the EMI TG desk, which was a transistor desk that came into being, I think, in the late 60s, probably 1967, something around about that time. And it was used for not this particular one, but the TG desk was used for the Beatles' Abbey Road and Dark Side of the Moon, 2 of the greatest recordings ever. And it is just a fantastic sounding desk. It's colours the sound, but in a way it's got fantastic transient response. And I was recently working at Abbey Road, and the staff there and the technical staff still think it is the greatest sounding desk that's ever been made. So I would certainly agree with that.
I didn't really care about gear much before then. The first time I really became aware of drum sounds and things was when I was doing McCartney, because he was interested in 1950s rock and roll, and he also had his contemporary material. And then when we started the tour, he wanted to do some Beatles songs on tour, which he hadn't really done before. And so I started to think about the gear that I had, and it was all really contemporary, cutting-edge gear. And I thought, it just doesn't sound right on this 50s rock and roll stuff, or on the Beatles stuff. So that was the first time in my career really I'd thought about gear and maybe vintage gear and stuff like that. And then when I got into the film and TV, as I say, people were using much more different drum sounds to what I'd been used to. They weren't really using all these really cutting-edge, high-tech sounds so much. They were more into character sounds and samples off old records with bits of scratchy and ringy snare drums and strange-sounding drums. And I just discussed it with Peter and said, let's do some stuff like that. Let's do some stuff that's really not contemporary per se. It still is contemporary, because you've got guys like Massive Attack and the Dust Brothers and Beck and Nigel Godrich using those sounds now, but at the time it was just at the end of when everybody was doing these big, really big, heavy-duty ambient drum sounds.
Even though it's called custom and vintage, actually the way we recorded it was so that the sounds would be totally adaptable for modern music, guitar band music, all different types of music. Actually, the vintage instruments, actually a lot of them are used in studios all around the world every day. It's just that they sound better than a lot of the new drums. So it wasn't supposed to be like a retro sound in any shape or form, though you can do that very well with this product. Actually, we were aiming it for everyday use.